Welcome to our podcast,
Thanks, Paul.
Foundations for a Healthy Lifestyle, written by Barbara Lockhart and Dr. Ron Hager.
It's a textbook.
It's a textbook.
So it's kind of a grind.
And it's a good one.
Oh.
Who doesn't want to have a foundation for a healthy lifestyle?
Well, I think that's a good point. And that's what we thought as well. There are a lot of wellness textbooks that are out there for college courses, but they all seem to compartmentalize the person into pieces. You know, the physical piece, the emotional piece or mental piece, the spiritual piece. And we kind of fundamentally felt like something was missing. And so we thought, well, let's take this a new direction. And so we wanted a course and a textbook that was an integration of the whole person as opposed to a compartmentalization, as if, you know, you do certain things to affect the physical but not the spiritual, as if they're not somehow intertwined. Mm-hmm. So that was our thought process.
I've really enjoyed reading your book.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Because most people don't enjoy textbooks.
No, I've really enjoyed it. And in a special, Coach Ron, can I call you Coach Ron?
Sure, I prefer that.
I've not shown Ron the respect that I should, because he's got a PhD in exercise science and posture analysis. I'm going to add that on there because that's one of your interests and your focus.
Yeah. I mean, right? It's a certification process that I have with a couple different organizations because that's a passion of mine. Yeah. But
so Coach Ron has been with us on our tennis journey for the last couple of years, with tennis and playing at BYU, and the assistant coach at BYU. Volunteer assistant coach. And that's Ron for you right there, is the volunteer part. And
I wouldn't have it any other way, just so you know, because there's no stress, no sense of obligation, no worry. You know, when you volunteer for something, you get a lot more freedom, not only in what you can think, but what you can do. So that's why I did it. That's why I like it.
Well, and you asked me before we started the podcast, why are we doing this? U.S.-Mexico Stem Cell Institute is a strategic alliance, has created a strategic alliance with a clinic in Mexico that we love, with a doctor that we consider to be the very best doctor. He's on the Mesenchymal Stem Cell Council of Mexico, and he's just a fantastic individual, Dr. Ivan Portillo, and he has helped us a lot already in specifically with the injury that Tennyson had on his knee.
Yeah.
Right? And Coach Ron has been with us through the last BYU season. And Tennyson played not the last season, because we just finished the last one.
Yeah, 2 seasons ago.
So 2 seasons ago,
yeah.
Tennyson came off the ATP tennis tour to play for the BYU, and then has gone back on tour. Right. Meanwhile, while he played at BYU, he had an injury on his knee that just persisted, and it started actually before BYU, but we found that when he was on the hard courts, that it was much more intense than when he was on the clay.
Yeah.
But Ron was able to point out a posture problem. I don't know if you'd consider it a posture problem, but will you tell us about it?
Instead of calling it, I guess, a posture problem, you could call it maybe a deficiency, or a compensation, and we all have them. And it's because of some of my training and some of my passion. It's interesting because I don't look at people the same way. I watch how they move, whether I'm walking behind someone in an airport, or I'm sitting in a mall watching people walk by, or whatever. I think,
or when you're sitting in the Tropicana and you're waiting for your friend Paul Whiting to come over and get us connected so that we can get our hotel room.
Right.
And you say, would you mind if I helped you with your posture, Paul? Right.
Right. So I see these
as
things.
I'm standing incorrectly, and what he helped me with, I'm telling you, made an immediate difference in my how I felt from my back, from my toes all the way to my back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what happened with Tennyson. And as I have a passion for tennis, I love that sport and the people that play. And even when I watch the pros play on TV, I watch them and I think it's only a matter of time.
So it's movement.
Yeah. So
it's how you move.
It's how you move.
First move well.
Then move often.
Then move often.
Yeah.
If you don't remember anything from this podcast but that, remember that. First move well, then move often. Now, the moving well, I mean, some people move often. I noticed in your book you talked about potential dangers of exercise and working out when you're not moving well.
Right. The concept here in first move well, then move often, a lot of people experience pain. Knee pain, hip pain, low back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain. And one of the first inclinations or reactions that people have is, oh, I have to get more fit. I've got to get to the gym. I've got to pump some iron. I've got to get stronger. And they're really just piling strength on top of dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And honestly, that can make things worse. You need to go to the root of the problem first, fix that. In the textbook we give the example of building a house on an unstable foundation, and it can be done. Mm-hmm. But whether that foundation is going to continue to be able to support that house is questionable.
We want a foundation for a healthy lifestyle. That's right. The name of the book.
The name of the book. Okay. Yeah. So when Tennyson was kind of presenting with some low back problems and some knee problems, and like I said, everybody has these postural deviations. Sometimes they're called, something different than what it should be. So it's a deviation.
Mine was with walking with my feet out,
right,
out like a duck.
And most people do that. Uh-huh. And Tennyson does that too. But there were a couple of other things going on as well. But one of the things I noticed mostly was, I started looking, when he started complaining about knee pain, I thought, okay, well, what's going on with that knee? And, you think in tennis, players move forward, backwards, left, right, angles, starting, stopping, rotations, all kinds of things. But probably one of the most significant impacts on the knees in tennis is the serve. And it's not that a person can't bend their knees and jump, but it's when they land. And I just noticed that, Tennyson's foot was pointed one way when his body was trying to go another way. And that just puts a rotation on the knee that, a dozen times or 24 times is no big deal. The body is super resilient, and it's designed to move in all kinds of different directions. And it's capable of doing that. But as someone like Tennyson, who's not just getting a dozen repetitions of something in a day, he's getting hundreds, if not thousands of repetitions of something in a day. And this is a problem that a lot of athletes have because they're so much more active and repetitive.
I'm just going to insert the word that I noticed in your book. I looked it up in the glossary, and you had mentioned it earlier. Microtrauma.
Yeah. So
teach us about that.
So, what causes the body to break down is when load exceeds capacity. And load can be a single instance of maybe, trying to lift something, for example, that's extremely heavy. And if it exceeds your capacity, then something's got to give and you can injure yourself. But another way is just sheer volume or repetition. Instead of, one maximal effort, it could be a small effort repeated thousands of times. But if it's done incorrectly, it creates a tiny and insignificant injury. The body, like I said, is very resilient. The body's designed to heal itself. But if you're doing something hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of times, then eventually that kind of load it's going to cause something to give or break or not work right, and you're going to be in pain.
Like the time I bend over to pick up a piece of paper off the floor and my back goes out, and I think, how could that do that?
Exactly. That was something that was something that built up over months, maybe even years, maybe even decades.
And how many injuries, sports injuries, do you think happen where the athlete thinks, I don't even know what happened. I was just running down the court and I was like, my knee's just really hurting me.
I would say the vast majority happen that way.
From the microtrauma that brought it about. Huh?
Yeah. I attended a certification program called the Functional Movement Screen with Gray Cook, who's a physical therapist. It's a really interesting program that I've learned a lot from. And he gave an example. This is one of my favorite stories. He's the one who coined the term, that at least where I heard it, was first move well, then move often. I never forgot that. But he tells a story about a female collegiate Division I volleyball player who ended up having to have both knees reconstructed due to ACL injury, meniscus injury. A lot of things were going on in her knees. And she... and this happens more in women than men. Part of it's a strength issue, part of it's a structural issue. But volleyball players jump a lot. And when she would land, she would go into a position with her knees called valgus collapse. That's when the knees go in, kind of like a knock-kneed position. And so when she lands, her knees would come together. And like I said, for the average person, who maybe jumps 10 times in a week, that's not going to be a problem. They can probably, their body can compensate probably for their entire life.
Sure.
But a volleyball player who trains and competes and jumps hundreds or thousands of times in a day or a week, it's going to create a problem. So he gives this example. They used motion analysis. They put reflective markers all over her body. She jumped off of a box and landed, and all it showed was the stick figure with the markers. And he showed this in this meeting, and the whole when she lands, her knees cave in, and everybody went, "Oh, no wonder she has knee problems." So she happened to play for a school that also had a medical school where she received treatment, and she had to have, like I said, some reconstructive surgery on both knees because she's an athlete. She's very fit. She recovered and rehabbed very quickly, and then he showed her marked up again with infrared markers and high-speed cameras jumping off of a box and going right back into valgus collapse. So in other words, they treated the symptoms, but not the underlying cause. And so she'll probably have knee problems again sometime.
Well, and I remember you telling me this story before Tennyson went to receive stem cell treatment down in Mexico in January. Coach Ron said, look, you can take him down and you can see if that helps, see if it fixes him. But a lot of people receive operations, whatever repairs they get done, however they do it.
Right.
Western medicine or alternative medicine.
Sure.
But if you don't find what's causing that, it may help for a while, but that's going to return.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I'm a believer in exploring all the options in medicine, outside of medicine. Another thing I've said to you before that I think you remember and you've appreciated is that if the body's given the correct stimulus, it can heal itself. That's what it's designed to do. And stem cells can facilitate that, just like an aspirin can facilitate relieving the symptoms of a headache. But if you don't get to the root cause of that headache, you can't take an aspirin and say, oh, my headache is gone. It must be because I'm not taking enough aspirin that I keep having these headaches. So it's not a lack of aspirin in your diet that's causing the headache. Right. So, and a lot of medicine treats symptoms. It's tertiary care.
Yeah.
It's only after the problem has occurred. And then but like I said, I'm not opposed to pharmaceutical intervention, surgical intervention, other kinds of medical treatments, rehabilitation. I mean, all of those things are great. But if you don't figure out how to move well, you're going to be dealing with that your whole life. I know that there are athletes who have this figured out. They go their entire careers and they're almost always pain-free. And other athletes have...
That's rare.
It's rare, but most athletes have bought in to the idea that I'm an athlete. Pain is part of my life. But it does, I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be.
Sure. Well, and you mentioned that with taking the aspirin. I noticed in your book that you mentioned that there's over... This was in 2020, that over 16 million people have addiction to that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
To pharmaceutical
medications
or over-the-counter drugs.
Yeah, even over-the-counter drugs. Yeah. Yeah. So it is a problem. So with Tennyson, I think stem cells was definitely the right way to go, because that is a stimulus that helps the body heal itself. But now he's got to get his posture aligned in order to allow that healing to be maintained and not go back into a cycle of repeated microtrauma.
Well, and that's he was treated the 7th of January, and within 30 days, the pain in his knee and in his back was completely gone.
Yeah.
Now, our hope was, because in November, and I think it was back in December, is when you discovered, what he was doing with his foot as he landed with his left foot. After he served, you land on your left foot if you're right-handed, and his foot was turned out just a little bit, and his knee was rolling forward as his weight moves forward. And we even hired an artificial intelligence mechanical learning scientist that put his service side by side with Djokovic and with Alcaraz, and that's what we were trying to see, what he was doing wrong. And I don't know if you saw it off of that video,
I did.
Or if you saw it off that video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Djokovic was landing differently.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, not everybody moves perfectly. Even Djokovic has had some injury issues over the years, but he's mostly been injury-free. And if you watch Djokovic walk around the court, his feet are pointed straight forward, his chest is high, his head is back. Contrast that with someone like Nick Kyrgios. I mean,
that's a good point.
You can't not see that Nick Kyrgios has some postural issues.
And Microtrauma might prove that out as we roll along to see where he is down the road.
Federer's another good example. Federer had a great posture. He did kind of move with his feet pointed out a little bit when he walked mostly, but relatively injury-free for most of his career compared to others who definitely force their bodies to compensate in ways that break their bodies down.
Okay, so let's talk to the average Joe here, and we're talking about these great athletes. I'm standing at the Tropicana checking in, and Ron's behind me, and afterward, just in a very humble, approachable way, the way Coach Ron is, he said, "Would you mind if I told you about your posture?" And tell for the listeners, because it's been amazing how much it's helped me and helped others in my family as I've talked to them about this. Nelson, we were on the cruise for a week with him. After the third day, his back bothering him, and I shared with him the same principles you shared with me. If you wouldn't mind sharing with the listeners, but he was much better, and he commented on how much better his back felt after just the pointing of the feet, the how many toes that you should feel, your butt cheeks that you should. Anyway, share it with us.
Okay, yeah, sure. So most people experience something I call glute amnesia.
Glute amnesia.
Gluteal amnesia, and it's we become a society of professional sitters. We sit in cars, we sit in offices. I mean, the first thing a person does when they go somewhere is they look for where's the closest seat, whether it's at the airport, whether it's at the doctor's office, and we sit too much, and our bodies were never intended to sit that much. We definitely need to stand more and be more active. We should be theoretically standing for this podcast.
Yes, we should.
We should.
And you taught me how to stand.
I'm serious. Why not?
Where it doesn't bother me. Like when you're not standing properly,
it hurts.
It hurts, and you're tired, and you need to sit down.
Yeah. So So basically, they have some load-bearing joints. You have your ankles, you have your knees, you have your hips, you have your shoulders, and they should all be lined up. When you walk, your knees should, or your feet should be pointed straight forward, not out at 45 degrees like a lot of people do.
And when I put mine straight forward, I feel like I'm pushing them so far in because
you feel like you're pigeon-toed.
Well, exactly, because I've walked so long with my feet out. And what has that done to my knees or my hips? I don't know. Because still microtrauma. Because I still feel good about things.
Right.
But
who
knows when and where?
So anyway, and I've talked to you about how when your knees are pointed in the right direction, even if you have to force them into the right direction, it pulls your pelvis into alignment, and all of a sudden, now your low back is relieved. And you feel like, whoa, what just happened? Mm-hmm. And that's from keeping things lined up. The muscles tell the bones what to do. This isn't just, there are some genetic contributions.
The muscles tell the bones what to do.
Yeah, so there are some genetic contributions to posture. This is why you can, say, wow, that guy walks just like his dad, or something like that. So that kind of stuff can be passed on. It can be genetic. It can also be learned. Little children, they watch their parents or other people that they're around the most, and they start to mimic them or do things like they do. But getting the glutes engaged, getting the hip flexors
so when I
balanced.
Walk, I should feel my butt cheeks.
You should.
I should feel my glutes engaging.
You should.
Right?
Yeah.
But I honestly, unless I am concentrating on that never happens for me.
Right. It doesn't. And
why is that?
And it's because we have compensated so much that when we walk, we figured out how to walk without even engaging our glutes. One of the things I like to have people try and do for this concept of glute amnesia is to do gluteal contractions. You can either do it sitting or lying down. If you're in what I call a hook line position, where you're lying on the ground with your knees bent and your feet on the floor, knees are at about 90 degrees, it's easier to contract and relax your glutes than if your legs are straight out. So even position of the limbs can affect your ability to contract muscles. But the gluteal muscles are under voluntary control. You can tell them what to do. And that's why I say the muscles tell the bones what to do. But we lose this neuromuscular ability. When we don't use something for a long time, we lose that ability for fine motor movements and even for gross motor movements like the gluteal muscles. So I'll have a person lie down in a hook line position. I have them put their hands on their abs because I don't want the abs to contract. Most people compensate by tightening their abs
when they walk,
or their hip flexors. Hip flexors are usually too strong, and low back and gluteals are too weak. And that's part of what causes some of the problems. So they're lying down, and I say contract and relax the glutes, but just the glutes. Don't let the abs contract. And then I really throw a wrench in it, and I say, okay, now just contract the left glute, right glute, left glute, right glute. And they struggle with that. I was just doing it. You couldn't see it, but you...
We saw you going up and down.
But with practice, with deliberate practice, you can consciously control those gluteal muscles, and then you can kind of get back on autopilot with that. Whereas you've gotten off of, you've gotten on a different autopilot with bad posture and bad movement. You can correct that, and you can go back, and then that can become the new norm.
Well, when were we in Las Vegas? We were at the Las Vegas Challenger.
Yeah,
in November?
Was it November? I think it was November.
That's when I started walking differently than I've walked for, as far as I know, my whole life.
Probably.
The one thing that you mentioned that I consciously think about, I thought about it when I walked from the car here into the studio. And I have to consciously think about it, but I do it every time I go out now because I've developed my mind and understanding of it a little bit. And you mentioned that in your book, how to overcome these challenges, whatever challenge it may be. But to walk with your big toe, feeling your big toe all the time, is how I've walked.
Yeah.
If you walk like a duck, that's what you feel, your big toe. But you said...
And you usually feel the inside of the big toe.
But you taught me...
To feel all 5 toes. Yeah.
All 5 toes.
The only way to do
on
that,
both feet, all 10 toes.
There's only way to do that is if your feet are pointed straight forward. You can't have your feet out at 90 degrees because then you push off on the inside of your foot and all these other toes are just kind of hanging there doing nothing. And a lot of people develop pretty substantial calluses on the inside. So, if this is your foot, in here where they push off, where the thumb is here.
On the inside of the toe.
On the inside of the toe, they develop a pretty significant callus. And
when they're not walking correctly.
Right. And it also begins to push that toe in. And so so your foot comes down like this, and then your big toe goes off at an angle just when you're resting. And then you've got kind of a sharp angle there in the joint that results in a bunion, which can, need to be fixed later. And if you do it chronically, then the joint assumes a new position, a permanent position that could take a long time to correct. Nobody went to bed at night, and woke up the next morning with bad posture. This is something people inadvertently work on for decades. So you have to be careful in thinking, what's the magic bullet?
That you can fix it in a
What's
minute.
the overnight cure? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we don't do the things we need to do on a daily basis, generally speaking. A lot of it's environmental, but it can all be overcome. It could take, days, weeks, or months to kind of get where you need to be. But then what do most people do when they start feeling better? They say, I don't need this anymore. I can go back to the way I was. They do this with diets. They do this with medications. They do this with exercise programs or whatever. So what you need to do is realize that you need core stability. You need a balance of mobility and stability. And that comes by working on it, not by sitting on a couch. Now, couch potatoes are rarely ever in pain unless they get off the couch, right? So,
which is why elite athletes are hurt because they get their injuries.
Yeah.
Because they're not couch potatoes.
Right.
They're out there pushing their bodies to the max, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, Ron, barriers to change come in a lot of different forms. Some are more obvious than others.
Yeah.
You wrote that in your book. People frequently say they want to change, but they struggle to make their change in their lives. I think we've all experienced that. What do you recommend to those of us who want to make the changes, but may feel like maybe we're
struggling?
Well, we're struggling either emotionally, physically, logistically, or I think those are the things that you mentioned in your book.
I mean, obviously, it can
determinism.
be determinism. Yeah,
talk to us about that.
Yeah, it can be tough for people to make changes. You do something the same way for years, for decades, for half a lifetime, and it can be tough. Now, sometimes change is tough because of addiction. Like, for example, a person who smokes, they want to quit smoking. Yeah. Or they, drink alcohol and they want to quit drinking alcohol. Things with addictive properties can have a whole host of their own kinds of problems. But when it comes to changing the way you move, you need to just somehow decide that the path of least resistance doesn't always lead to a place you want to be. In our culture, in our society, I don't know, how this is in maybe some parts of the world, but in general, these, well-developed countries and nations, it seems like the ultimate goal is a level of efficiency in productivity that requires you to do nothing. Like I said, we immediately look for the first place to sit down. We would rather use an automated dishwasher than wash the dishes by hand. We would rather use a riding lawnmower than a push lawnmower. We would rather use a self-propelled lawnmower than one that isn't self-propelled. I mean,
so with the more technology we get, we may even become more that way, huh?
Well, all I'm saying is, if you go back to our ancient ancestors and think about the way they lived their lives and the way they moved, there was probably a lot more crawling. There was probably a lot more falling down and getting up. There was probably a lot more hands and knees work. There was more bending over, standing up. I mean, there was just a lot of things. You know, Paul, I think about people who get older, maybe into their 60s, 70s, 80s. And
that's all of us. We're getting older.
Right, and that's what you want. But what's one of the number one fears people have?
Falling down.
Falling down.
Sure. Breaking your hip. Fall down, break your hip, you're done. 60%.
Tell me if you can think back to when you were 5, 7, 10, 12 years old. What were your thoughts about falling down back then?
Well, it was constant, wasn't it?
But it was cool. It was almost like, I personally remember running around in the lawn with my parents watching and saying, "Mom, watch me fall down." And I would run as fast as I could, and then I would intentionally fall down and roll on the ground and then pop back up. And now, you know, you get to be older and you're just like, "Oh, I can never fall." Dan Buettner.
So if I'm going to live to 139 years old, I've got to be able to learn how to fall correctly.
Well, why not?
Sure.
You know, or
well, it's interesting that you point that out, Ron, because I felt when I parachuted and fell back in 1992, long time ago, over 30 years ago, I did not do the proper parachute landing fall. It's called a parachute landing fall.
Yeah.
They taught us how to fall properly. We spent 3 weeks.
Why did they teach that?
Well, we spent 3 weeks learning how to fall. It's your feet, your knees, side of your knees, your hip, your shoulders, and then you tuck forward, right?
Yeah.
It's a parachute landing fall, a PLF. And I did not perform the PLF properly, feet, butt, head. And I lied there. I lie there on the ground with tears rolling down my eyes. First Special Forces Group, Green Beret, Ranger, Airborne qualified, and I was hoping that nobody saw me. And when I got up, for the next 30 years, I experienced severe back pain in my back until I got stem cell treatment.
Yeah,
that's the honest truth.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that you say that about how to fall, because they even taught us how to fall.
But when you're young, falling is actually kind of cool.
Sure. Well, jumping out of an airplane falling is pretty cool.
Sure. Or, you know, running across the gym floor and then going into a slide position and sliding as far as you can on the wood floor. Kids love that.
Or into second base.
Yeah. But adults, they're like, no, I don't do that. I don't do that anymore. What do you mean you don't do it anymore? Nothing's really changed. You've gotten a little bit older. To be fair, maybe you need to be a little more careful. I was going to mention Dan Buettner. He's a guy that has done some work with National Geographic, and he has studied the longest lived people in the world in the areas they live in, like Okinawa, Japan, or in Costa Rica, or even Loma Linda, California. And he's tried to identify what these, the highest concentration of centenarians do. And I think about, something I read that he wrote about in Okinawa, Japan. We're talking about people who are centenarians or 80, 90, 100 plus years old. How many times a day do you think they get up and down off the floor? Now, this is Okinawa, Japan, so they sleep on the floor, they eat on the floor, they
sit on the floor.
People come over to visit, they sit on the floor. Probably 25, 50, maybe 100 times some of them get up and down off the floor in a day.
That's not hurting their bodies.
No.
You're saying it's helping them.
So it's kind of like what I would call a primitive movement. This idea of climbing a tree or crawling or getting up and down off the floor. Things that our ancient ancestors did routinely. Things that we now avoid. Mm-hmm. When was the last time? I mean, I'm sure you know people that are 80 years old. If you ask them, when was the last time you were all the way down on the floor and got all the way back up? And most of them would probably be like, I haven't done that in years. Why not?
Well, now that's an interesting point, because I was as I'm writing the book. I told you I'm writing the book on stem cells, on the fountain of youth.
Right.
My grandmother lived to 104 years old, and she did her push-ups. Now, they were girl push-ups.
Sure.
And I would watch her. I would sleep over her house. I would watch her. She would do her push-ups on her knees and her sit-ups every night.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's
to 104.
It's a habit. So back to your original question, how do people overcome barriers? How do they start doing these things? For it's a variety of things, Paul. For some people I know, like for weight loss, I've known people and worked with people who are very, very overweight. And the deal breaker for them...
I'm overweight.
Well, not like these people are. I'm talking about people that weigh 350, 400 pounds, 450 pounds. The deal breaker for them a lot of times is they have this realization that there's a good chance I'm not going to be here to, watch my kids graduate from high school or get married or, and that's the...
They accept that.
And
that they're going to die earlier than someone who's...
Right, but what happens is they don't accept it. That's the kind of the aha moment. That's the slam the hand down on the table and say, that's it, no more. I want to be here for my kids. I want to watch them graduate. I want to watch them get married. I want them to see them go to college. And so something clicks inside them. And everybody has to find that, kind of their purpose in life. That's another thing Dan Buettner discovered, that these longest lived people, they have, in Okinawa, they call it ikigai. It's their purpose in life.
Ikigai.
And it's and all these groups have that, whether it's in Sardinia, Italy, or Okinawa, Japan, or Loma Linda, California. They have this purpose in life, and a lot of it has to do with social structure and friendships. The other interesting thing, Paul, is these people that live the longest and relatively pain-free, they don't exercise. They don't even know what the word exercise is. But it's the way they live their life in terms of dietary patterns, thought processes, and movement patterns. They don't look for ways to diminish their opportunities to move. They look for ways to enhance or at least maintain their opportunities to move. They still ride bikes. They still walk. They still go up and down hills to the vineyards.
So what I'm hearing you say is that not to take away from the desire to get to the gym and do the fitness workout,
sure.
but I can implement those little lifestyle changes that will make the difference, perhaps just as much as if I'm going to the gym. In some ways, right?
Start small. Realize that it's helping you. Don't bite off more than you can chew, and build on it. It just realize that it takes time.
My wife always makes us take the stairs.
That's smart.
She does it. Well, she first started doing it when we first got married because she doesn't like small spaces. She has a little bit of claustrophobia.
Like elevators and stuff.
So let's take the stairs. Well, when it's 12 levels on the cruise ship,
right.
Taking the stairs kind of wears you out. But then we felt like we could eat a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I tell people all the time that when it comes to looking for opportunities to move, let's say you work, in downtown New York on the 85th floor of an office building. Mm-hmm. Maybe go to the 90th floor, to make it a little easier, and take 5 flights of stairs down to work. But eventually you could build up to going to the 80th floor and then going 5 flights of stairs up to where you work. I'm not saying you need to take 85 flights of stairs every day when you go to work, but I'm saying we've spent so much time looking for ways to eliminate opportunities to move and move correctly, mm-hmm. that it's become our norm. And we have to consciously say, I'm going to look for opportunity. This is kind of a funny story, but it's a true story. A while ago, we had a dog. The dog has since passed away, and I miss him. But it was an old English sheepdog, so a big dog who left big piles in the backyard. And, I liked it when my kids would clean it up, but a lot of times they didn't, so I found myself doing it. So I take a plastic bag, and I put it in a bucket, and I go out, and I put the bucket down in the yard, and then I would go get a pile on a shovel, and then walk back and put it in the bucket. And then I'd walk to another pile, and then bring it back and put it in the bucket. And I'd do this over the whole yard. And my son comes out and says, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing your job." And he said, No. He said, "Why don't you carry the bucket with you? It's got a handle on it, and maybe put 2 or 3 piles on a shovel, and then throw it in the bucket." And I said, "I will not be robbed of opportunities to move." So
interesting.
So what's the most efficient way to clean up the piles in a backyard? it's obviously not the way I was doing it, but that's not what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for the most efficiency. I was looking for the best opportunity.
To move often.
Yeah. And we can do that. You can take a moving sidewalk in an airport, but you don't have to stand on it. You can still walk on it.
Sure.
And you can take stairs instead of elevator. Now, if you're trying to lug a 50-pound, rolling bag with you, then that might not work for some people. But
I thought about, when you mentioned that, move well, then move often.
Yeah.
I've tried to find some things. The one thing that I started doing since you taught me that is when I ride an elevator, an escalator, I put my feet on and I do the ankle lifts.
Sure.
To see if I can get 30 in before I get to the top.
Sure.
Right?
So so now you're thinking the right way.
Yeah.
Because our environment is built to take movement away from us. So you have to inject it. Funny video I saw is a commercial. A mom is in a minivan in the driveway of her house, and she's yelling for her son. Hey, I can't remember his name, Johnny or something. Hey, Johnny, get out here. I'm not going to take you to your friend's house if you're not here right now. I've got other things to do. She's going on and on. And so Johnny finally runs out of the house and hops in the van. Sorry, Mom. She pulls out of the driveway, drives to the next house and pulls in the driveway and lets Johnny out to go play with his friend. Yeah. And now that's an extreme example, but the only reason somebody thought to make that commercial is because
this happens.
Because it's almost true.
Sure.
And we just have to be careful. One of the things that I love to share with my students in one of my classes is the difference between our not so distant ancestors and us. And I give them the example of, it's known that Abraham Lincoln would sometimes walk 30 miles round trip just to obtain a book that he wanted to read. He had no other way to go get the book except to walk. And so he did. We don't have those same limitations placed on us, so we don't even conceive of that. I ask my students, I say, literally, if there was a book in a library 15 miles from here and you really wanted to read it, would you really walk there to get it? And of course they're like, no, of course not, because I would drive or I would get a ride or I would take a bus or whatever. And so it's totally outside of our scope of thinking even now. That
it's outside of our sense of efficiency.
Right. Mozart was known to walk 30 miles and in some occasions in excess of 60 or 70 miles to go to a concert to listen to music that was being played for the first time, just so he could be there to do that. I asked my students, there's a concert in Salt Lake City that is your favorite group and you really want to go, but the only way for you to go is if you walk. How many of you are going to go? Nobody raises their hand. They're like, I'm not walking to Salt Lake for a concert. Are you kidding me? So because we have so many economical options in terms of our movement, we can't even conceive of what people did even 100, 150, 200 years ago. And we've lost that. We've got to get it back.
So perhaps our ancestors had a better foundation for a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, they faced...
Because of their lack of modernity and
sure.
transportation.
And they probably faced other important issues that we don't face now that impact our health, like they don't have stem cells back then. Yeah. They didn't have antibiotics back then. There was no penicillin.
They didn't live as long as we do now.
No, and so that's why I always say I'm grateful for the benefits of modern medicine, but you can't say that genetically we're different than our ancestors. We're not. The human genome has stayed the same for millennia. So we have this evolutionary discord with our environment and our genes. And we have to be very careful about how far we're willing to go. I don't know if you've seen the movie WALL-E. It's an animated movie about the future where people just lay on hovercrafts and go all over the place. They don't even walk anymore. They can't even walk anymore. They get off their hovercraft, then they don't know how to walk. And again, kind of an extreme example, but not so extreme if you think about where we are now versus what we were doing 200 years ago. So advances in modern medicine, yes, I'm all for it. But, a lot of things that were known, maybe even not so anciently, have been lost. And we've got to get those truths back into our lives.
Well, speaking of today's culture, one of the comments that stands out for me in your book is the statement that that you mentioned that over half of the adults in America deal with some kind of chronic illness or chronic pain.
Yeah.
I thought, half? Are you kidding me? Is it really half?
Oh yeah. Yeah, maybe even more, or they will at some time deal with some kind of long-term pain. Yeah.
And tell me, give us your perspective on that.
Well, I brought a study in for you that one of my grad students did and published.
The short-term corrective exercise program on chronic knee and hip pain.
Yeah, so we brought in 40 people that had diagnosed chronic hip and knee pain, and that was debilitating. Like in other words, it prevented them from doing certain activities of daily living. In other words, they weren't fully functional the way they would want to be. And we put them on a corrective exercise program based on their unique postural deviation. So that's one of the keys here is working with a person specifically on what they need, because not everybody needs the same thing.
Yeah, well, specifically, I mean, I know you have a talent and you've studied it so long that you see it so well in others, but how about BYU's old coach that you were able to help?
Oh, Wayne Pierce?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll tell you about him. But first, this study. So we randomly assigned these 40 people into two groups, and we assessed using a visual analog scale their level of daily pain. Plus, we used an instrument called the WOMAC, Western Ontario McMaster Arthritis Index, or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's a measure of function among people who have arthritis. But you can use it in people who have chronic pain, because chronic pain sometimes is due to arthritis, sometimes it's other things. And we put them, each one was evaluated based on their unique postural deviations and given corrective exercises specific to their needs. So 20 of them did that, 20 of them did not get that. And at the end, we looked at the acute effect, which was like after one bout of corrective exercise, plus we looked at them at 1 week and 2 week intervals. And so this is short term, 2 weeks. And those that had the corrective exercise program significantly improved on their functional abilities as measured by the WOMAC, and on their visual analog scales, which is just a kind of a sliding scale for level of pain that you experience each day. And the control group did not. And one of the questions we asked, which was kind of off the cuff in the survey, was at the beginning of the study was, how many of you are anticipating a joint replacement procedure in the future? Total knee, total hip. Mm-hmm. And every single person, all 40, said, "Oh yeah, that's part of."
They were planning on getting that knee replaced.
Yeah. They had already bought in. They'd already bought in that. Yeah, that's just my life, and sometime in the future, I know that's going to happen.
Not me.
Well, at the end at the end, so everybody. So at the end of 2 weeks, the control group hadn't changed, and in the 20 subjects that were in the experimental group doing the corrective exercises, not one of them said a knee or a hip replacement is in my future. So they went in 2 weeks. They went from
they were the same 40 people.
Yeah.
At the end, the 20 that had the corrective exercise were saying, "I'm not going to need my knee."
Why would I want a knee replacement? I don't have any pain.
From what they learned in 2 weeks of corrective exercise.
Yeah. So Wayne Pierce was one of the first coaches.
Yeah, this is the story that makes me think of it.
Yeah.
Right?
So Wayne Pierce was one of the first tennis coaches at BYU. I think he was the second coach, and
he was there a long time.
He was there a long time. One of the winningest coaches in their history, and he was a legend. I mean, he was a good tennis player. He was known in Utah especially, but even in the region, nobody wanted to go up against Wayne Pierce on a tennis court. He was good. and he was tenacious and he was a fighter. So I'm watching him and some of the other guys that would come on a daily basis to the indoor tennis courts at BYU to play doubles. And I would sometimes be there playing with somebody. And I knew who he was. He had no idea who I was, because in my mind, he's kind of famous. I mean, he's in the Utah Tennis Hall of Fame.
Sure.
And so, so I knew who he was. And I didn't at the time know how nice a guy he was. I thought, he's probably pretty unapproachable and, pretty intense. But I would
Very
watch
personable.
him. Yeah, but I would watch him play tennis, and I couldn't take it anymore. So one day when he was resting between sets or something,
Now this is when he's older. He's
in his 70s at least.
He's still playing.
And so I finally built up my nerve, and I went up to him and I said, Wayne, my name's Ron. I said, I know who you are. You have no idea who I am. I said, I can tell that you're in a lot of pain. And I said, and if you don't want to hear this, just tell me to go away. So I was very apologetic, even just going in, because I thought, because it's a personal thing.
You didn't tell him you were an exercise scientist.
No, but you're
PhD and pretty smart guy.
But you're invading people's space and their minds when you start talking about their health or their personal issues, right?
Sure.
Especially if they don't know you.
Well, that's how you were with me when you asked me if it's okay if you told me how I stood like a duck.
But I've gained some confidence since Wayne Pierce. Uh-huh. So I said to him, I can tell you're in a lot of pain. I can tell that it's affecting your movement and the way that you play. And I said I'm a professor in the exercise science department. One of my areas of expertise and one of my passions is postural alignment and reducing chronic pain. I said, I think I can help you. And he said, I've also been watching you, and I think I can help you with your volleys.
I'm sure he could help you with your volleys.
And he
could volley. And
not only did he help me with my volleys, I gained a lot of confidence. I still don't come in the net much, but when I do, I probably win the point 80 or 90% of the times, because I'm very selective about when is the right time to come in. But anyway, he definitely helped me. And he was kind of funny about it. And he said, yeah, tell me what you're talking about. So I talked to him a little bit about what was going on. He came into my office. I did a one-on-one postural assessment. And I mean, he was a train wreck. And he was in so much pain. I did the visual analog scale with him. On a 10-point scale, 10 is like worst pain I could possibly imagine. On a daily basis, he was a 7. He was a 7 or 8.
I remember talking to him at one point along the way where he mentioned how the trouble that he was having with his knees.
Well, he couldn't even serve anymore because he was looking down, and he had such a head forward position and rounded shoulders that he couldn't look up to see the ball. His neck would not go back. So he couldn't even serve anymore. So a lot of times he would just go out on the court and hit. But when he did serve, he would toss the ball up in the air and then kind of roll his eyes to the top of his head and swing his racket and hope he made contact.
I'm envisioning that. I watched him play.
Yeah. So he said to me, I was filling out, my will and kind of my final things I was getting in order, because I didn't expect to live much longer. Well, I put him on a corrective exercise program, and it changed everything almost immediately. And he was out on the court for an hour at a time playing tennis, back to serving. And then he quit because he said, yeah, I was feeling great. I'm like, I don't need these exercises anymore. And then he said, and then the pain came back, and then the dysfunction came back. And then he said, that's when I knew I have to do this every day. Sometimes he would do it twice a day. And he probably played tennis for another 8 or 10 years at a higher level. And he also joked, and it wasn't really a joke, it was true, but he made a joke out of it. He said, and I was 2 inches taller.
Yeah.
Because he stood up straighter. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Ron. I think our time's up.
Okay.
Coach Ron Hager, author of Foundations of a Healthy Lifestyle.
Thanks.
Foundations of
a healthy lifestyle.
Of a healthy lifestyle. I said it right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Lifestyle means something you're going to do for the rest of your life, right? Not today and quit tomorrow.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks, Coach.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul.